with the teams now trying to build their rosters, and especially the new expansion teams coming in and wanting to create a roster from zero, basically, the rumor mill has been running high. And one of the reoccurring stories I'm being told by sources is that it's in the interest of both the RunAway organization, being the staff of RunAway, as well as the players, that they want to be sold in a package deal. So what that means is the team of, at least of the players, I can't say much about the staff, but the players want to stay together and remain as a unit and go into an Overwatch League team that way. Now, the goal of this video is to sort of illuminate the two ideas, being that's a good idea to wholesale or to buy the entirety of RunAway, and that's a bad idea for certain reasons. I can already reveal I personally think it probably is a good deal, and I've displayed as much publicly, so I won't hide that bias from you, in the sense that I personally believe it is a good move to buy RunAway wholesale, obviously without knowing any of the buyout prices they require. I will then later on make the case against it, which is personally also quite convincing, and you will be able, hopefully from this video, to have a more educated point. Keep in mind, a lot of this is still speculation, and as well as subjective assessment of the players, and you will have to do your own research in order to form a reasonable opinion on this. So obviously this has been the case before. So already last season, and once again RunAway wasn't doing that hot in Contender Season 1, and then also before obviously then in Apex Season 4 they were the runner-ups of that final. Once again lost it close. Heartbreaking story once again for RunAway. They finally got their redemption in Contenders Korea Season 2, it would be called, I believe. And yes, it once again pops up that RunAway as a whole wants to stay as one. Now, what are the reasons for an organization as the type of that RunAway is? Why would that be desirable? Now, obviously, an organization that has been around as long as RunAway has built a certain culture of players, and for some reason they've been able to, bi-seasonally, if you want, so every second season they have a resurgence, and something in their culture, in their makeup, possibly also around the longtime players Huxel and Stitch, but something seems to be the quality of RunAway. It could also be obviously the staff around RunAway that makes them come back every second season and deliver good performances, and obviously be the best team in Korea. So there seems to be an inherent quality in those players, even though for many of those positions, RunAway has been a fairly revolving door. Everyone can remember the fans of old, Kaiser certainly, and Cox, and all these players have not been part of the winning formula or of the roster at all for the Contenders Korea finals victory, of course. Now, the very fact is that the only unifying factor in their success were Huxel and Stitch, and then the name RunAway, with the behind-the-scenes personalities such as Runner and Flowerin, his wife, for those who don't know. And I'm sure there's also more stuff behind the scenes, but there seems to be a certain formula that they figured out what constitutes success in Overwatch, because certainly making it to the final is already an achievement, and then finally also getting to jump over your shadow and actually beating KDP in the finals is certainly an achievement, especially if you have to try it 3 times. It also has to be mentioned that RunAway doesn't seem to be absolutely dead on selling the roster as a whole, because we already know, and precedent has been set, that RunAway does sell players individually if they want to. Tizzy, obviously, formerly the main tank of RunAway, then went to the Spitfire, never got to play really ahead of Gesture, simply because Gesture has to be considered one of the best tanks in the world. Tizzy couldn't be there, and I wonder if this caused some disgruntlement within the RunAway organization, where they said, okay, this is what you get when you sell your players individually. You can't really, you're basically selling players as second fiddle. I don't know if that's true. I have no sources on this. I'm just simply speculating on the fact that this one sale that they didn't really work out well for them. Now, another justification for RunAway that they now want to demand from teams to buy them wholesale is obviously that this was already done last season. The winners of the current Overwatch League season, Season 1, is obviously London Spitfire, and famously they bought the entirety of GC Busan, which were the winners of Apex Season 4 at the time, so the most recent contender season when the signing window opened back before Season 1. And then they also bought a bunch of players from KDP. And this then ultimately led to a success. We now know this formula, albeit you have to say maybe it was a little bit lucky in the sense that obviously London's trajectory was sort of like, okay, win stage 1 and then go downhill, especially in stage 3 and stage 4. And the fact that they then won the season is already on slightly dodgy ground, just empirically. But you also have to say that argument is not really strong, especially in the light of when you look at who GC Busan kept around. So Closer is in the lineup, but doesn't really play. And then only Gesture and Profit made up the core of the actual eventual winning roster that London Spitfire fielded in the final, and that then brought them the success. So this is where the counter arguments against buying a wholesale roster start, right? One more positive point I have to mention as to buying the RunAway roster wholesale. You're obviously, in buying everything, you're buying the spirit of RunAway, aren't you? So you definitely could argue, also if you somehow can get it past branding from the Blizzard side, that you keep the brand alive, possibly with imagery or like, your team avatars or your flag or whatever, and then also have a name that sort of resembles the RunAway spirit. But do you want to have that, right? Do you want to count on that? Then again, RunAway, probably the most successful brand outside the Overwatch League. RunAway is a staple within the Overwatch community. Most of the people know their name. It's not very usual, especially for a team that isn't an academy team, to be this celebrated by fans, especially in the Korean region. And certainly they've also won a bunch of Westerners' hearts. So in that regard, you're definitely buying like marketing value that previously was hardly matched, possibly only by Envy. But then again, once it depends who you want to market to, right? So keep that in mind, though. That's definitely value that they're getting if you're buying the entirety of the current RunAway roster. Now, let's actually analyze the players on the current team, because certainly one aspect of that wholesale trade has to be, is the whole of RunAway actually feasible, and are they something that could win the Overwatch League? Because I don't have specific values, but I've been told that obviously they are demanding a respectable price, and as they probably should, because they're the reigning champions of Contenders Korea. So you would think that they are demanding quite high prices, right? So keep that in mind. You want to at least buy a team that makes it into the playoffs of the Overwatch League if you're shelling out the kind of money that you're probably going to have to pay. Once again, this is where your speculation radar should go off. I'm speculating here. So, okay, let's start from the worst player that I personally think. I think that one dead weight player you're buying, if you're buying the entirety of RunAway, would certainly be Hurek. I've not pulled my punches when evaluating him as a player. Famously called him, not really famously, but I called him bot on Jane's stream once. This notion then was much later echoed by the Contenders Korea shoutcasters Wolf and Achilles, who also said Hurek really isn't performing that well, and they actually went back to look if Hurek was a respectable player in Apex Season 4. I will say, yes, he was at the time, And he actually had pretty okay performances during the time that Birdring dropped off. Then again, he simply wasn't a top caliber player, probably not one of the caliber of a playoff contenders team. And then also in Korea, you have to say, he was just straight up worse than Stitch. Like basically every single time, I haven't researched it, but I wonder how many maps they actually won with him. He obviously didn't play a single match in the finals, for good reason, I have to say. His Widowmaker is respectable, but other than that, I don't think he has much to offer that I can tangibly assess, and I certainly would think that he's one of those dead weight players that I possibly wouldn't want to buy if I'm a GM of the new Overwatch League team, where a GM that's coming in and wants to recreate the best roster for the best buck is probably going to look at Hurek and go, I don't really want you on my roster, man. I'm sorry, but like I'm trying to build a world-class roster with the money I'm giving you, and you're simply not what it takes to be. So the other players, and this is, by the way, might strike people very strangely, because personally, if we're evaluating the performance of RunAway this season, I personally think they weren't a DPS carry team whatsoever anymore. And this almost sounds like blasphemy at this point, because Huxel and Stitch have been a staple ever since Apex Season 2, and to me, they weren't the outstanding performers on RunAway. Now let's go down to this. Obviously, So has performed very well on Zarya. On the other DPS picks, I'm not quite sure. He hasn't played that much this season, and I wonder if you sort of like in a like in a way want to only have a player that you know is a world-class Zarya, right? I don't know if that is justified. I also don't know really what the level of his other heroes are at, because he simply didn't play enough, right? So already a slight question mark. If I had to guess, I would still put him on my team. And now I will establish really quickly a concept where I say you don't have to have every single player a top class player. Just pay him what he's worth. Like, you don't have to have insane salary. You saw it on, for instance, Los Angeles Valiant had a bunch of those players where I assume they were pretty close to the minimum of 50k a year, and you basically had them because you possibly could luck out in their development, and you gave them a chance, and you gave them the resources, and you also wanted to in-house Scrim, and now that all worked out, famously they signed Aziaki, they signed Finzi, they had Lumlocked around. There's one name I'm missing, but you get the point. Maybe so-and-so definitely could be one of those players that you want to develop as to then possibly slot in depending on the meta changes, really. Also, I have to say, someone that can play Zarya on that level, there has been a high skill transition between very good Zarya players and also very good Soldier players. And if we are feeling out if Soldier is going to be in the meta soon, just for, you know, if you have like a rotation of novelty that I assume sort of Blizzard keeps around, where they want to have every character in a steady more or less steady rotation of relevance, I think it's high time for Soldier once again. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a Soldier buff before the season started. And then So could certainly slot in, but also you have Stitch, DPS or hitscan specialist, who obviously played one of the best traces in the world in Apex Season 2, then sort of like dropped a little bit, Apex Season 4, yeah, but then now in Contenders Korea also picked up Widow, and you have to say was probably a top 3 Widowmaker in Contenders Korea. Once again, there's a lot of teams now battling around the best players. If you can have one of the top 3 Widowmakers in the best region in terms of developing talent, you're probably not buying a liability. Let's say this much. Stitch is almost a veteran at this point, even at his young age. I'm not sure if can be considered dead weight. I think he's a very serviceable player, even for a playoff team. I don't think there were... So for instance, if I was to compare him to someone... Let's see. He is probably like he could be like a libero type of character, even though that's more the Huxel part. Do I have a better example? He would be someone like maybe a very good AKM, I would say, like a top performing AKM where he has a certain hit scan style. Even though he's very hard to compare simply because he has also had a pretty big hero pool. He's extended it. He has the accolades at this point, and I don't think you're buying dead weight there. Next one in line would be Huxel. Huxel has displayed over his career immense versatility. This guy has played Lucio to a respectable level. Basically, like, it's actually comical how many heroes he's played. Obviously, was once considered one of the best Genjis in the world. Certainly is there mechanically. He is now also turning 18, so the reason you didn't see him before in Overwatch League was most definitely because of his age and possibly also the wholesale stuff. But I don't think gambling on Huxel to become once again this monster that he once was in Apex Season 2 and then also in the later seasons where he certainly was one of the top performing players on RunAway, he has never really been a liability. Let's say that. It's definitely on the level of, okay, this is actually where I would say you could definitely count on him to perform on a level that Libero did, and they are probably pretty comparable players because they're simply insanely versatile. And I also would expect Huxel to be able to really deliver elite performances on projectile heroes. Now, the rest of the players are actually probably the best in their position you can hire in the Overwatch League, with the exception of Janu. I'm not sure if he's the absolute best, but okay, let's go down the list. Bumper, nuts performance in Contenders Korea. The outstanding tank, actually a carry tank. You have to say he's new to the role, and with how insane his performance was over the season, you sort of have to anticipate that he will drop off a little bit because there's very few main takes that have deployed a performance of the level of Bumper over several seasons. It's very hard to apparently perform consistently on the main tank role, but Bumper certainly one of the outstanding tank players that we've seen from the Contenders region. Definitely not a liability about buying there, rather even one of the best talents you could buy. Then you have Janu. Janu definitely also with Dako, and yeah, Dako probably the best diva player or flex tank you could pick up at this point in time, unless you're buying from already established Overwatch League teams. And by the way, I'm excluding European players here because once again, if you're buying this wholesale, then again, okay, so if I'm thinking from the GM perspective, yes, if I'm buying a split team, are there better players in Contenders, EU and NA? Probably only about equal players, right? So certainly not someone that I would consider clearly better. I think I'm even undervaluing or lowering or considering Janu to be worse than many experts would. And then the backline with Twilight and Slime is also, like, was the best backline in Contenders Korea by my estimation. You're definitely not buying liability there. You're definitely possibly buying maybe even an MVP candidate of Contenders Korea and Slime if you want to give it to a main support. But he had a very, very good Contenders season, and Twilight also is an outstanding player. You're not buying dead weight there, and I don't know if you could actually buy talent from outside of the Overwatch League in order to buff up and actually upgrade over Twilight. Now, obviously, keep in mind, if you're already paying prime prices for RunAway, why would you not be able to also attract with that money top performing players from other teams? And you do have then a full Korean roster. I doubt, for instance, that Jonak would go, but maybe you could get someone else like a Neko, for instance, or like an Alarm, or like a like an aim god or whatever. Maybe that's possible, right? Are you upgrading over Twilight? In some cases, probably, simply because of the veteran status, and it's definitely a very different game to come from Contender's career into the Overwatch League, but I'm not sure, right? That's a very, very hard call to make. Also because we simply have no touching points between these two performances, being that Contender's career never really cross-plays much with Overwatch League players, with the exception of, obviously, Team South Korea scrimming against RunAway and RunAway winning it closely. Then again, how much signal power does that have? I personally don't consider it to be much. So let's list general counter arguments that could stand against the wholesale. So I already mentioned one: the precedent of GC Busan being bought out wholesale, as well as the Envy being bought out wholesale, bombed completely, right? So you had to reassemble a new team. If you're buying this RunAway roster, it's quite likely that you will have to buy more players in order to sort of like rejuvenate the roster in certain positions where you have to build a new roster that arises from that core in order to, be victorious in the Overwatch League, whatever that means to you. It's also one big factor in all of this is that I already expanded upon is, okay, so you're buying the culture of RunAway. So if you're buying the entirety of RunAway, you're in a way buying RunAway. But are you actually? Does that mean this buyout also comes with the people who created that system? Does it come with Runner? Runner is in the military. Does that work? He will most definitely not be able to, or let's not say most definitely, but it will be hard for him to leave South Korea at this time, right? So will his wife with a child then leave and, sort of sustain that culture? It's very hard. Maybe there are people behind the scenes that can structure in the way that RunAway used to deal with it, and maybe that culture can be maintained, but it's certainly a big question, isn't it? So are you actually buying what makes RunAway successful if you can't have these people that have been one of the constants in their success over the seasons? It's also problematic in the sense that, do you actually need big roster sizes? So once again, we already said that there might be some dead weight on that roster. Do you want to pay those salaries? And to an extent, has the precedent not only already been set that big rosters don't work in the Overwatch League? That has to be a question. I'm not sure if we have 100% empirical evidence on this, given that, for instance, Valiant had a full roster and was internally scrimming. But for the most part, for instance, London Spitfire famously let go. NYXL wasn't already that big. Okay, so Fusion is a counter-argument. The jury's still out on this run, right? So depending on what your belief is on roster size, by buying RunAway and having someone like Hurek and possibly Sumansu on there, you're sort of taking 2 slots away, which you could give to players that could actually substitute your potentially playoff roster well, and could bring you over the season, because we know there could be very many meta changes, and you need to be prepared for that, right? So these are hard questions where I personally can understand in which direction you're going based on what kind of priors you already have established and what you want to do. And my current information is that GMs mostly think that they can do a better job than just buying out RunAway. And that could potentially lead to a situation where we're not seeing those players in the Overwatch League, at least as a whole. Now, let's go through this really quickly, hypothetically. So, this wholesale could fail. What happens then? Well, the new teams will already have bought out other rosters, have created a core there, and then they will only look for substitute players. So at this point, it's likely that then they would have to sell in parts. If that's turns out to be so undesirable for most GMs to not take a chance on RunAway, and that would then also be problematic towards the players in getting the buyout fees that they want. Because certainly, if you're building your core, this is where most of your resources will go. And I don't know how many GMs will gamble on the scraps and keep a lot of their resources towards the end of the transfer window, but they could potentially pick up some gems which haven't been picked up before. Like a Bumper, like a Slime, like a Wholesale potentially, right? So, will we see RunAway in Overwatch League Season 2? As a whole, I'm not sure. We will very likely see a couple of those players. I'm not sure if that means we were going to see them as one unit. But then again, this is something that you can think about yourself and then entertain. What would you do if you were the GM? Would you buy out RunAway, Wholesale? And by the way, try to not have those rose-tinted glasses on too much. Or would you try to be more resourceful with your allotted cash? Thanks for watching.